After uniting a few Turkish lords in Anatolia under their banner, namely the Danishmends and later the Artikids, the Rum Sultans took advantage of the weakening Eastern Roman Empire and conquered the predominantly Greek center of Pontus. But the border with Georgia crept its way through the interior of Anatolia. Without any warning, Sultan Rukin ad-Din outright conquered the Saltikids of Erzurum, giving his brother the region before appointing him as co-sultan, thereby ending the century-long rule of the Saltikids. The Saltikids never really had much luck in terms of politics or in the battlefield, but like the Georgians, they happened to produce a female ruler in the same time. Mama Hatun was the daughter of Emir Saltuk II. If you remember, he was the guy that was ransomed by both King Demetrius and his son, George III. And like Tamar, her counterpart commissioned beautiful buildings to be built. Perhaps the last Saltikids ever built, in fact, was her magnificent tomb. It takes inspiration from Annie of all places and remains mostly intact today. Like Tamar in Georgian history, Mama Hatun stands out in Turkish history as a handful of female rulers, and a well-respected one at that. What are the chances that they would rule next door to each other at the same time? She's still celebrated to this very day, and appears as a common character in local legends, just like Tamar. Rukin ad-Din followed up his conquest by sending a letter and a gift of all things to Tamar Mepe. The contents of this letter promised all-out warfare if the Georgians did not make concessions with the Rum. After sending her own gifts and kindly rejecting the Sultan, he sent another letter. The envoy again delivered it to the Queen of Queens. This time, Rukin ad-Din hit the lowest chord he could have, calling every woman feeble-minded, and Tamar in particular, a simpleton of a queen. But Tamar was the ultimate killer with kindness, so she responded rather taunting. "You rely on gold and numerous warriors. I, on God's power." A final envoy was sent to Tbilisi. Out loud, the envoy read in the middle of the court that Rukin ad-Din wished to marry the queen if she converted to Islam, and if she had no desire in that regard, she could join his harem as a Christian. Zakar Zakarian was the first to jump from the queen's side. He grabbed the envoy and beat the shit out of him, and threatened to give him a Georgian necktie if not for respect of diplomatic immunity. As the bleeding envoy scurried away, Zakar made a clear declaration of war. The Darbazi immediately called for war with the Rum after that. Rukin ad-Din had no idea just how invested the Georgians were with their queen. After disgracing her as a monarch and by gender, the response was the largest Georgian army assembled in all of history. An unbelievable 60,000 men came to Tbilisi to defend the honor of their beloved Mepe. As per her custom, Tamar would lead the army to the closest monastery deemed safe from the conflict. This meant they were going to the cave city cliff complex of Vardzia, where a relief of Tamar and her father ruling side by side was already painted. The soldiery amassed in the valley. Tamar took a step out onto the balcony overlooking all of them. Here she gave what was probably an epic speech, although any first-hand account has gone unrecorded. I felt, though, that this most climactic moment in Tamar's story couldn't go without a speech, so I made my best rendition. The Sultan of so-called Rome has disrespected my name, title, and our faith. All this, and they don't even own Rome. They took what was our Roman allies' land, and now they come for Georgia's. Will you let them? In this time of need, tell me, are you a Kartvelian, or a Cantvelian, Armenian, or Artmenian, a Shirvanite, or a Shirvanot? Are you a Lanian, or a Lani out? Will you Dagestan, or Dagesit? Okay, yeah, okay, let me just stop. But seriously, with this region, I could do this all day with these names. Tamar waved and rejoiced, celebrating with the cheerings of 60,000 before she walked back into Varzia Monastery to pray for these same men. King Consort David Soslan then led another outnumbered force out of the Georgian heartland. Accompanying him were practically all notable Georgian commanders of the period. Of course, the Zacharid brothers Ivan and Zakhar, then Ivan Torelli, son of a previous marshal, a popular poet and noble warrior, Sargis Tamogveli, and then there are the relative newcomers to the Georgian political scene, themselves an offshoot of the Torelli, the Alazikeli brothers, the older being Shava and the younger being yet another Ivan. The Georgian army was in very good hands, and the best part about it is that Rukin ad-Din had no idea they were coming. For the following Battle of Bassiani, David Soslan would take a play straight out of the book of David IV. The preemptive strike would occur in the middle of the night. The Georgians sent an advanced cavalry detachment to swarm the enemy camp. The room awoke and fended them off, but then came into view the entire Georgian army, arrayed how they would be on a map. Abkhazians on the far left flank with Heretians and Shirvanites on the right. The Alazikeli brothers held the middle, and Ivan on either flank, Zacharid and Torelli, arguably the most battle-proven Zakhar, holding the retreat watching the youngins win the glory. Soslan just in front of him held a reserve cavalry behind the middle line consisting of his elite guard. The Georgians marched on their foe, who somehow managed to assemble for battle in time. But these groggy men were not in proper formation, and the Georgian cavalry swung in from either flank. As the center infantry rolled in, the heavy armored cavalry flanks dismounted to fight on foot. Soslan watched as this battle turned into a mosh pit. The Georgians made advances, nearly encircling their foe until the room finally woke up. They started to fight back, and soon one of the Ivan flanks started to fall. Torelli. Soslan took the opportunity and once again led a charge that completely devastated the enemy. This started a rout and won yet another outnumbered battle. Sultan Rukin ad-Din retreated as the Georgians ran him down back to Anatolia for 6 days. The entire Rum camp and its loot from Byzantine provinces fell into Tamar's hands, as well as the standard of another rival. Those who surrendered were sold into slavery, including the Sultan's vassal emir of similarly named Erzurum, Erzin Khan. He was sold for a single horseshoe, and an iron one at that. Tamar used a large portion of the profits to remodel Varzia. While it was a fort under her father, she would turn it into a masterpiece maze of a religious and communal site. All of this while keeping it a defensible structure. Seriously, this looks like something straight out of The Lord of the Rings. With the loot from the Rum camp also came more advanced and secretly kept knowledge from the Muslim world. A book on medicine would be found and ordered to be transcribed by Anton Nolastovidze, George III and Tamar's long-term chancellor. This alone would pay off more than any piece of gold-encrusted jewelry. The resulting manuscript would come to save thousands of lives, as Georgia had no great advancements in the world of medicine previous to this. For old Anton, this would be his last great and perhaps most lasting achievement. After serving the Bagrationi as chancellor over a 30-year period, the old, partially warrior bishop who held the cross at Shamkor would die. He would be succeeded as chancellor by the Catholicos Patriarch, Theodore II. But to not make another problem like Catholicos Chancellor Michael IV, Theodore first stepped down from his position as Catholicos in order to become chancellor. Treating the highest religious office like a training ground for imperial office seemed a viable strategy. Over the course of that next year, the Georgian army split and went rather unusually west and along the Black Sea. Here, a quiet, although powerful neighbor would enter the fold. The Circassians, directly to the north, shared a long and fruitful alliance with Georgia. But when the fiercely independent Circassians were presented with a rare prospect of joining an empire of one of their own friends, plenty took the deal. The more mercantile-minded Circassians, especially those on the coast, joined the empire, tribe by tribe, as tributaries. And that was really all Georgia wanted from them. The Kabardians in Circassians' heartland was still very much so out of the Georgian hands. Bottom line, you know you're doing something right if the Circassians willingly join your empire, because they would rather go through a genocide than do that, at least with Russia. The Georgians took this campaign back to the Rum front in 1204, taking advantage of the death of Rukin ad-Din, who was probably so surprised to be beat by a woman that he died. This allowed for the expanding around Byzantium's last holdout in Trebizond. Preparing to reinstigate an old score, Tamar happened to have not one but two Eastern Roman emperors just sitting around in her court. These boys were her nephews, Alexios and David Komnenos. Tamar's sister, Rusudan, had married the Byzantine prince and would-be emperor before being dragged through the streets of Constantinople and ripped apart by an angry mob in 1185. A man who had previously visited Georgia during the reign of King George III, Manuel Komnenos. The 25-year-old Alexios and the 23-year-old David invaded Trebizond at the head of a Byzantine Georgian army, and the gates of the city swung open for the Komnenoi. Simply for clout, they changed their last names to Megas Komnenos, or Grand Komnenos, before declaring one of the smallest empires in history, the Empire of Trebizond. Alexios stayed behind in his new capital while the Georgians were not yet finished with David. Shortly after the birth of the Megas Komnenos, the Fourth Crusade ravaged Constantinople and practically destroyed the Byzantine Empire. Reduced to a few splinter states, among them and with a head start, being the Empire of Trebizond. Tamar ordered for the Georgians to take David along for the ride of his life, a gamble for the city at the center of the world, Constantinople. Long story short, they got most of the way there before encountering Theodore Lascaris and his Empire of Nicaea, another successor state even more well-positioned to take Constantinople. The Georgian army slowly withdrew from David's army over the next few years, and David resorted to allying with the Latin Empire that had sacked Constantinople. But still, he was defeated by Lascaris and the resurgent Rum. He would be forced to become a monk and would die a few years later. Alexios, stationed in Trebizond, remained a strong ally and vassal for the rest of Tamar's reign. Although the Komnenoi didn't retake Constantinople, Georgia now had the glory of the legacy that is Rome at their fingertips. A powerful thing, but something slightly more diluted in this uncertain age. After securing Alexios, the Rum campaign ceased after another hearty expansion. Meanwhile, in Armenia, those always active Zakharid brothers were back at it and attacking Georgia's perpetual rival, the Shah Armenia. Preparing to enter the final stage of this 50-year war, they took the plains of Manzikert, which was hugely symbolic as a win for Christendom, but strategically it was of less importance. The major center had moved south in the ensuing years under the Shah Armenids with their capital city of Klat. Here, the Zakharids struck, besieging the city before yet another Muslim coalition showed up. Detachments from the Rum and the Eldeguzids most notably contributing. Using the city to their advantage, this coalition did manage to defeat the Georgian army, who thereafter withdrew. Still, most would live to fight another day. This army would have likely regrouped and at least held a defensive position, but of all things, religion would force them to abandon the campaign altogether. In this melting pot of an empire of more languages and ethnicities to count, religion had usually been something Georgia was rather enlightened about. Wow, that was a good rhyme. Of course, the Bagrationi and the state religion was the Georgian church, but there was another distinct and similar church, the Armenians. The whole squabble was one that had been playing out for centuries at this point. The nature of Jesus being part human, part God, or all human with some God, yada yada. During the reign of David IV, he had tried in vain to mend these differences and combine the churches, but he had failed. Now the Armenians, who had done so much to build this empire, were refusing to fight for Georgian commanders. Meanwhile, Georgians who had done so much to liberate the Armenians were refusing to fight for Armenian generals. Tamar, ever the compromiser, would find a solution to this problem, but for now, she had enough skilled Georgian and Armenian generals to spare. After taking a year to recover from external and internal wounds, the Georgian-Armenian separate armies took the region of Kars at the expense of the Rum, a huge roadblock for both Georgia and Trebizond. Again, these armies swung south and besieged the city of Kalat. This time, no help was coming. They needed a miracle to outlast the Georgians. Ivan Zakarian and a small scouting force decided to take a trip in order to more closely inspect the walls. As they neared closer, the Turks opened the gates and charged directly at Ivan. The scouting force was caught off guard, and Ivan made the split-second decision of flight instead of fight. As they reared their horses, Ivan drifted his into a ditch, and it landed on top of him. As the scouts galloped away, Ivan's older brother Zakar watched in fright as they approached the fallen horsemen. He was relieved to see that Ivan was alive and seemed to be okay. And then he got really pissed as he was taken prisoner back to the city they were about to siege. He quickly sent a letter. "If you dare to take my brother out of the city or do something to him, I will conquer the land of your country and give it to the Georgian kingdom." Not only this, but Zakar really knew how to get a point across, ending the letter with a classic, "Oh yeah, and I'm gonna kill all of you." Despite Zakar's best efforts at threatening his way to recover his brother, Tamar had no problem paying a ransom for one of her prized generals. 100,000 dinars was the price for Ivan alive. Not only this, but for assurance, Ivan's daughter would have to marry the Sultan of Shah Armenia. Checkmate. Somehow they survived another war. But one more, and surely these most resilient of enemies would give up. The Georgian army returned yet again. Again, another year they would delay the campaign, for there were more pressing issues even compared to the religious disputes. David Soslan, king of Georgia and Alania, lifelong lover of Tamar Mepe and father to her children, passed away in 1207, likely dying young, although we do not know his birth date. The pair had been married for 16 years that would turn out to be the most prosperous in Georgian history. Soslan won 2 massive military victories, the odds of which were both not in his favor, defeating Georgia's most powerful enemies with ease. Most importantly, David, unlike Yuri, allowed Tamar to rule and was her biggest supporter. They stand as one of history's greatest power couples. Not to mention, his 2 children secured the Bagrationi dynasty, although technically he may have created his own Soslan dynasty. But Tamar's aunt Rusudan did adopt him, and he was partially Bagrationi already by blood. Come to mention, I forgot to talk about the demise of Tamar's influential aunt Rusudan. But this is because she simply disappears from historical records, likely dying sometime around the turn of the 12th century. So the question stands, was Georgia under an Alanian dynasty after this? I would say no, but technically, yeah, they kinda were. But technically, Tamar was a female king, so the Georgians had no problems bending the rules to support their ambitions. Unfortunately, with the death of her husband, Tamar appears less and less in historically verifiable sources, perhaps taking a step out of the limelight and allowing others to step into it. Her son George Lasha would reign alongside his mother just as Tamar had her father. Lasha was only 15 upon his coronation. His princely education was not even over, not to mention the military training the job demanded. To fill David Soslan's role would be the likely still recovering ego of Ivan Zakarian. Tamar created a new official role in her court, the tutor, tasked with raising the Bagrationi spawn, as well as any other royal children, perhaps hostages that found themselves in Tbilisi. For Ivan to secure this spot, he needed to focus his full attention onto it, so Tamar replaced him with his own vassal, Vache Vachetian. He would remain in his spot for the rest of Tamar's reign, using his newfound wealth to construct two of Armenia's most beautiful monasteries, which, for your amusement, I will now attempt to say. Sagmosavank Monastery and Havhanvank Monastery. At any rate, Ivan would undergo another, more massive change than a job title. He would take David Soslan's spot not only as tutor, but in the army. To settle the Georgian-Armenian religious conflict plaguing the otherwise efficient military, Ivan converted to Georgian Orthodoxy, baptized by the new Catholicos, the rather hardline Orthodox John. Now the Zacharids could lead both Georgians and Armenians. Soslan was good, but this was a scary prospect, even if Ivan was half as good a general as his brother. Ivan's daughter was still married to the Shah Armen, which would prevent any future invasions. But then, poof. Suddenly they were gone and Georgia had nothing to do with it. The Ayyubid ruler, commonly known as Safaddin, like his uncle Saladin, took Kalat and immediately made word to Tamar, reassuring the Georgian Darbazi that there was still nothing to fear from the Ayyubids. The following year, a proper treaty was strung out, taking a step toward alliance with the Ayyubids, as they agreed on a 30-year truce with Georgia, also agreeing to split the region of Armenia through the middle, north to south. A free, albeit minor land grab, and at least one friendly face in the south to show for it. But even more numerous were the enemies here, and even more ferocious did they grow. On Easter Sunday, the Sultan of Ardabil, a breakaway state of the Aldeguzids, ambushed the city of Ani, its gates wide open for the celebration. The results were total, a looting as the life work of the Zacharid brothers restoring the city was flushed right down the drain. You just pissed off the wrong Armenians. Ivan and Zakhar, leading Georgian and Armenian armies respectively, paid the Sultan a visit on Ramadan, looted his capital, and slayed him, conquering Georgia's farthest southeastern outpost. But like I said, the Zacharids were pissed. They had spent so much money on Ani, they intended to go to the ends of the earth to get it back, plus some. The brothers marched past Ardabil, farther east and south, taking cities and plundering them before moving on to the next. Eventually, these cities simply started surrendering and paid tribute to avoid a ransacking, largest and most notable being Tabriz. The Zacharians then reached a fork in their road called the Alborz Mountains. Here they sent letter for Tamar asking permission if they could go forward, which she granted. Here, they could take the safe route to the north along the Caspian coast, or they could go south through the unknown of inner Iran. But let's be real here, there was only one option for these brothers. So of course they took the southern route, plundering, pillaging, and gaining surrender as the fear of their name spread far and wide. At one point the Zacharids simply got lost. They had no idea where they were with Georgian maps and were hearing names they had never heard in Iranic languages they had no direct translators for. So do you think they turned back? Of course not! They marched the length of the Alborz Mountains before going north and finally reaching the salty shores of the Caspian, after a long 2 years of what was becoming one of Georgia's greatest campaigns. After reaching the coast and something of a supply line, the Georgians raided their way across the southern Caspian. Finally, after 3 whole years, the Zacharids' armies reached Georgian soil. Acting like a couple of Xenophons, the Zacharids returned from what was likely the most enriching campaign in Georgian history. They only stopped because they had too much loot to carry and no supply line to carry it back for them. Wow. This would be enough to restore Ani yet again. But Tamar made sure everyone got a slice, giving it away to the poor and downtrodden, as well as donations to churches and through noble endowments. Not even a year after returning from the campaign that would cement his legacy as one of Georgia's and Armenia's greatest generals, Zakhar Zakarian would pass away. Like Soslan, relatively young. To replace the longtime marshal, Tamar offered the seat to the next best thing, that was his brother. But he rejected, requesting Tamar instead make his young nephew, Zakhar's son, Shah Zakarian, the head of the army instead. Tamar accepted. Ivan did not decline the offer solely out of the goodness of his heart, though. While it may have seemed that Shah was the head of the army, it was actually his uncle, in another newly created role tailored to him. Ivan Zakarian would become an Atabeg? The originally Turkish title was used to denote the tutor of kings before they themselves started ruling their own countries, in the case of the Eldeguzids. Its rank in the Georgian court was a new top, the highest and most respected office, with powers overstretching from finance to military. The Atabeg could only be home to the most loyal of subjects. Ivan would remain in this role for the rest of his life. Using his new powers, there was one last conquest the Georgian Empire needed to secure: the Greater Caucasus and the vital mountain passes from north to south. The last roadblock was another coalition of northern native peoples. The Derdzuk, Chechens, Avars, Ingush, and any of the other multitudes of ethnic groups in the northeast Caucasus once again banded together in an effort to take down their overgrown neighbor. The last 5 times this did not go well, but independence was far more important than winning for these particular people. Ivan Zakarian made mincemeat of them. First, he went straight for the middle, cut off the Chechens, and surrendered them out of the war in mere months. Then he moved to the east until reaching Shirvan, and by the time he went to take out the Ingush, they were already calling for peace. Thus, the last big land grab in Tamar's reign had been completed. Take a good look at this map, because this is the biggest the Kingdom of Georgia would ever be, stretching just over 1,000 miles from Crimea to Ardabil, and spanning the length of the Caucasus. I do believe this is the nicest looking, most geographically correct empire in history, and I love it. It's straight up map porn. Over the course of this video, I focused mostly on the military and political scene. I felt like it was necessary to split such a large video. But talking about these great generals makes you miss the reason they were even in their positions in the first place. We must remember this is a story of court politics at its heart. There's some chivalry and nobles doing all they can to impress and honor their queen. While Tamar was active leading armies on marches, by far her most important contributions were to making a better, happier society for her subjects. Tamar donated, built, and added on to a multitude of monasteries and other religious sites. Might I mention Vardzia again as a crowning achievement, but there was also extensive renovations on Shiomigvi Monastery and Jalati itself. A highlight of Tamar's architecture was extremely large domes, something architects could only dream of having the knowledge to create in the preceding centuries, at least in Georgia. Not to mention the churches outside of Georgia, Tamar used her own purse to donate to. Of course, in Jerusalem, Tamar gave the most. But as far as Egypt and on the coast of Bulgaria did Tamar give to her Orthodox kin. Tamar also gave her nobles permission to build their own churches en masse, which they gladly did. She was also a whole subject on herself. We can only look to the art of the queen to see this. Church songs praise her, poets portrayed her as the ultimate monarch, Persian titles were adapted and placed into them was Tamar. It's safe to say that she might have just been the biggest celebrity of her day. Her name was known far and wide, her deeds coming ever greater through the poets that made her immortal, beyond life and into fiction. Heck, there was even a few North Caucasus tribes that literally put her in the pantheon of gods as a fertility goddess. A compromise to Georgian missionaries I'm sure Tamar got a blush out of. But we must remember where and when Tamar ruled. In the Islam and male-dominated societies of the Middle East, she ruled as a female, the ultimate contrast of her time. Some saw through their own religion, like Saladin and his Ayyubid family, and made friends with this unique monarch, while others, like Rukn ad-Din, had to learn the hard way that a woman could rule just as well as many men could. While Tamar, in my opinion, was the perfect monarch, she was never a fully authoritative one, always advised by her court officials and generals. This allowed her to have a hands-off approach in war. Letting her husband and those Zacharid wolves run free may have just been Tamar's most impressive compromise. She balanced feudalism like no other. Tamar, with her host of strong men at her back, allowed herself to be the most forgiving of rulers. Her father's harsh laws for criminals were ended, along with the death penalty and even torture, unless you committed treason. That was an exception. Tamar used this forgiving nature to kill the Caucasus with kindness. The mountains of hundreds of languages and peoples could not be brought together by the harsh punishment of the father. Only under a mother like Tamar, history proves this is the only way this could work. And when the forgiving didn't work, then a bunch of mountain men would enslave your people and hunt you down. Tamar's open-mindedness created a multi-ethnic melting pot of an empire, something of a utopia where everyone had a fair chance and everyone pretty much got along. Tamar had her favorites though, and those were of course the Georgians and Armenians. They were the powerhouses of the empire after all, and tied together through a common history. She perfectly mixed these peoples together and put them on equal footing in the same kingdom like never before. Even when religion became a conflict between the two groups, Tamar found a compromise that made everyone happy in the end. Unlike many other Georgian kings, with the exception of the start of her reign, Tamar was a meritocratic appointer and a damn good one at that, giving loyal, not yet famous or fabulously wealthy noble families a chance to shine. Because of this and Tamar's own donations to the churches, common folk, the downtrodden, and everyone in between, the people of the empire became wealthy. The amount of class advancement at this time was unprecedented. Farmers could become nobles, nobles, grand dukes, homeless could finally purchase a plot of land for themselves. Quality of life only went up. This wealth, of course, was gathered on campaign, but mostly from trade. The empire now sat on a massive nexus of the Silk Road with so many trading cultures like Jews, Armenians, Abkhazians, etc. They finally had a chance to use their expertise on a global stage. Chances are, if you needed something shipped to or from Europe to China, using the Georgian route, either the Caspian or Black Seas and along the mountains would be the quickest and safest way to do it. Alternatively, if you needed to get from northern Eurasia anywhere south on foot, you had to use a Georgian pass. No one ever controlled these crossroads with impunitive authority in the same way Tamar did. While balancing all these things, Tamar also balanced her very gender. While she was a woman, she played the role of a king, so she always had to make sure she acted as such. Any minor slip-up would see her lose face. She walked an asexual line, sitting on both the throne of a king and a queen, juggling both roles at the same time when most could never do one just as well. Tamar's golden age can only be described fully in the fiction of poets, because this world she created might as well have been one. No one living in the war-torn Caucasus could imagine living in such a paradise as this. This was an age of chivalry, an age of unexpected heroes and good vibes. Tamar was the champion of the Messiah and the ruler of the mountains. But all good things must come to an end. Perhaps since the death of Soslan and Tamar's subsequent step from the limelight, she was not only suffering from loss, but a mysterious disease that the best doctors could only help to ease. The increasing amount of pain coming from the stomach region. Many fingers point to cancer due to the longevity of this illness. But we all know Tamar was nothing if not a fighter. Even when she was finally forced to concede defeat at last, she did it in the most nonchalant, most professional, politicized way. Unexpectedly, the now frail Mepe interrupted her Darbazi council, and as if excusing herself from the dinner table, warned of her, quote, feminine infirmity, and not to worry about her in a time of non-stop warfare. She then walked to seat herself on a chair where she would be carried to the Bagrationi Palace in Tbilisi, and that was the last time the nobility ever saw her. Tamar only made one more official decree after her more than earned retirement. God forbid if something happened to her only son, like, I don't know, a stray arrow to the chest, There was no legitimate Bagrationi to succeed him yet. Tamar then named her daughter Rusidan as confirmed third in line for the throne. Within a few weeks of this, Tamar the Great passed on into the next life in January of 1213. She would live on forever, and very soon afterward be canonized as a saint, officially named Holy Righteous Queen Tamar. You may think this is where Tamar's story naturally ends, but her existence was so that her story transcends life itself. One mystery still and has always eluded us. Where is her tomb? We have 3 major suspicions but no confirmations as to where her final resting place might be. A letter from a French crusader in the Holy Land told of a young King George bringing his mother's body to Jerusalem on pilgrimage with him, as Tamar never got to in her lifetime. The story goes she was buried in the cathedral of the holy monastery that she donated so much money to in her lifetime. This letter has a dating problem, but to support this theory, 2 female skeletons were found in the monastery, but their DNA was not tested. If one of these is Tamar, then who's the other? My guess is as good as yours, but I'm going to take a pretty wild guess here. Tamar is long dead and a few times over great aunt, Byzantine Empress Maria of Alania. I only say this because her father, King Bagrat IV, largely built the Jerusalem monastery with his own funds. And we also do not have a recorded place for her burial. But like I said, this is just a guess. Another suggestion that may have already been disproven is that Tamar Mepe was buried alongside David Soslan in his Alanian homeland. I say may have been disproven because in 1946 an archaeologist discovered a tomb in Nuzal Chapel with Georgian inscription that said Soslan on it. And they found no Tamar alongside this burial. Of course, Soslan was a popular name in Alania, so this could very well belong to another man or even prince named Soslan. While the rest of the world hasn't accepted this theory, the Ossetians have. But we will not know until more experienced archaeologists could perhaps carbon date something in the tomb or present a skeleton for DNA. So if Tamar isn't in Jerusalem or Alania, then she must be in the most obvious spot. Although she must have been hidden, so she may never be disturbed. It only makes sense for Tamar to be buried in Gelati Monastery, with the past 3 kings and her ancestors. But where? Perhaps in the floor like her great-grandfather David IV? In the walls? Did they hang her from the rafters? We don't know. Anti-Soviet Georgian writer Grigol Robakidze once wrote, "Thus far, nobody knows where Tamar's grave is. She belongs to everyone and no one. Her grave is the heart of the Georgian, and in the Georgian's perception, this is not a grave, but a beautiful vase in which an unfading flower, the great Tamar, flourishes. Although the search for Tamar's tomb is not over, it does not matter, because her memory lives so vividly in the present day." It seems safe for me to say that no queen means more to their people than Tamar to Georgia. So many things are named after her. Some of Georgia's most traveled streets, World War II legions, plays, songs, the game Civilization VI, fucking Age of Empires 2, the Georgian 50 lari bill. If you go to Tbilisi today, she's simply everywhere. And that is her tomb. Tamar Bagrationi, despite setbacks and disadvantages early in life, had done the impossible. A woman had not only unified the entire Caucasus mountain region, but also tamed it like no one else could before or after her. But her story is more than just an empire. What she created was a mythos for herself and country. Georgia was viewed through the lens of a panther's skin now. What we must remember most, and I've said it before because it is important not to lose sight of this, is that this is a story of court politics, and Tamar was the most successful and kindest Machiavellian to throw her crown into this ring. She is simply the greatest cultural leader in Georgian history, and that will never, ever change. Her many accomplishments and good deeds grant her a spot among history's greatest female monarchs. No Elizabeth nor Victoria, Isabella's or Wilhelmina's, no Cleopatra Boudica, not even Catherine, the other queen named the Great, can compare to the wide-arcing advancement Georgia underwent during the reign of Tamar. She is the harbinger of the Golden Age. The Georgian Renaissance probably would have never happened under another in the same way it played out with Tamar. Now, let's end this how we started it. Cue the Shoto Rostaveli. Their kingly mercy was given to all. It fell like endless snow. The poor stopped begging. Widows felt safe. Orphans were helped to grow. Evildoers were scared. Their ewes had lambs, but no milk to bestow. In the realm of their kingdom, the goat with the wolf could safely go. If you'd like to support this stoic historian, feel free to do so on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. And join Derek Clark, Savaclio Nazarian, Taj Guilford, Nick Matevassian, Lazarus Dykos, Dave J, Dan Lenar, and Moist Lord. Or become a YouTube channel member like Derek Clark again, Donald Vincent. What? Why? Nick Matevassian again, God, Heath Dion, Carl Brandian, Layla, and GOK. Thank you guys for supporting the channel. I really, really appreciate it. This has been like a 2-year journey to get to this point in the Georgian series, and oh my god, I never thought I would get this far.